we started a project, which I've discussed. The first Tanya was printed in 1796, but in, 1978, the Alter Rebbes, so the master who wrote this book, had a disciple who had a disciple, so 7 disciples on, the last Rebbe of this movement, in 1978, said, we've printed a lot of Tanyas in many languages in many places. Now I want to not print it practically, as in we need more Tanyas, or in different languages, but just spiritually. There's a huge benefit to printing a Tanya in a particular location. A, because as we learn, we're creating a home for God in the physical world. That's how Jews work. We don't need to pop up and become enlightened souls and walk around in heaven all the time. We're actually bringing God right down here and revealing God here in the physical. That's the whole point of creation. That's what gives God the biggest pleasure. So you can stay in the physical and make a blessing and wave a wolf and etrog, and you've managed to accomplish much more than you would by raising your own level of consciousness, because we can't get closer to God by getting more spiritual. It's only by bringing God down to the essence of why God created the world that we can bring infinity into the world. So you can do that, A, by printing a Tanya somewhere, but also B, you get huge blessings to the place, right? It's understood, and I'll share a story at the end of the class, that when a Tanya is printed somewhere, physically with the paper and the printing, that brings a lot of blessings to the organization, to the people that help, to everything about it. So the Rebbe created a campaign of sorts to print Tanyas in as many locations where Jews live as possible, just to elevate those places for no other reason. And it kind of started and it kept going, and now you can read how it was printed in communist China, and they had to submit the Tanya translated to the government of China to have it okayed before they could print it. When there was the war in Lebanon, they rushed in and they printed Tanyas in as many cities as they had control over, and kind of rushed them back. There's stories of, where was it? In Iran, during that whole business with the Shah, they printed a Tanya there, and a few hours after they were done and left the building, a shell landed on the building and blew up the printing press and the building and everything else, but they got the Tanyas out. So all kinds of adventures printing Tanyas in the most far-flung places. And on top of it, it goes back to something that the Baal Shem Tov revealed, as when he had an elevation, he had a soul, he could go up to heaven and speak to all kinds of very lofty beings. He had an elevation one Rosh Hashanah, and the letter exists. He wrote a letter about this. It exists in the same library where now a copy of our Tanya will be placed. He said, I had an elevation on Rosh Hashanah, and he described the dangers of elevating to that height and all the souls he was passing and the angels, and he came to what was called the Chamber of Mashiach. So for us in Reformed Judaism, we believe a Messianic era is what we're working towards, and that's contained in heaven somehow. That potential is there. Traditional Judaism says there's actually a person every generation who could be, has the potential to be the Mashiach. So however you look at it, that's where the Baal Shem Tov was. And of course, what does a big tzaddik ask the Mashiach when he's sitting there in heaven in front of him, face to face? When are you coming already? We've been waiting thousands of years. We've been praying. We've been sacrificing. When are you going to come? And Mashiach said, when the teachings of Hasidus reach the outermost levels, when they spring out and flow out to the farthest places. So that was also a part of this campaign, was to have the teachings of Hasidus, which very much the Tanya is like the written Torah of Hasidus to many, many Hasidim. When that gets to the craziest, most far-flung places, and they don't just print it, but they learn it, that will help bring what all Jews are working for, including us at Temple Israel. So hopefully we did our part. That was a far-flung place for the copy room at Temple Israel to be printing a Hasidic text from 1796. And we now have them delivered. I want to thank Rick for really pushing this over the goal line. You have to kind of, when you're in the market for doing mitzvahs, you got to compete with people all over the world, and you're pushing to get to the front and no, print this. And so it got stalled a little under my care, and Rick came and made sure that we actually talked. At least we got them, in paper in our hands instead of just conceptually. So thank you, very appreciative. And I'd like to hand out one to each person. So Sue Ellen, why don't you come around? I'll give you a Tanya and Doreen, if you want to come. Now these are Hebrew. So we're gonna, Doreen. These are Hebrew. So it's of value to learn from them, but unless your Hebrew is very fluent, even I, without the vowels, it's hard to like learn completely from them. Mazel tov. So what we're going to do is I'll learn a little from here, and we'll share, and then when we're online, you have one? Okay. When we're online, we'll do a few lines from it, so we've actually learned from this, and I hope you'll keep this at home and pull it out along with your text for the class. Mazel tov. Maya, you have a personal one of your own? This is for you.
Thank you.
Marcus? Eleanor? And I'll add, anyone who's learning with us online, we have many online students. If you'd like your copy of the user's guide for this old Tanya, the West Bloomfield Walled Lake Tanya, please let us know. Happy to send you one. And just a couple notes about this. No, we don't have those slides around, do we? Okay. So, I don't know if you could pan in a little on the front page on the camera. Can you catch a bit of this? So this is the same title page that's been in every Tanya, or something like it. And you see here, it says Walled Lake, West Bloomfield, Michigan. So this is now an official edition of the Tanya. It's not like self-published, just so you know. This is Kahut. This is the publishing arm of the Chabad Rebbe's organization, back to the 20s, I think, or even earlier. Kahut may be right back to the beginning, but in America. So this is actually a Kahut edition. This is an official edition of the Tanya. Walled Lake, West Bloomfield, Michigan. If you go to the next page, you see the number it is. It's number 7,533. So in this campaign, there's been over 7,500 Tanyas printed all around the world in different places. And ours is 7,533. I'm looking for some kabbalistic meaning on what that number is. So if you're one of the people that research that online, please send us ideas. And interestingly, if you look in the back, oh, see, I put a tick in the, oh, I'm not looking at this one, that's why. No, not that. In the back at page 4, if you turn to page 430, I think. Yeah. So from page 431, so if you have your copy at home and you're following with us, page 431 starts a list of every Tanya that's ever been published. So the first one here is in Slavita. You can't read it. It says there on the third line down. It says Slavita. Remember that. And now it goes through every single Tanya that's been published. That's, 150 pages? So if you go through this whole list, 490, 504, 526, 530, where does it end? The very end of the list, 568, there it is. Page 580, go to page 580. There's this many pages of tiny list of printed editions. And here, 1, 2, 3 from the bottom. I got to highlight it here. I'll try and put the slide up online later if I can. You have, it says, our edition, Walled Lake, West Bloomfield, Michigan, the size of it, etc. So now every single Tanya that will ever be printed again is going to have this list with our edition of the Tanya as part of the list. So wherever it's printed anywhere in the world, we're part of that. That's on page 580. On the left side, see there's Zayin Tuf Kuf Lamed Hey is the bottom one. So that's the edition 35. Then Lamed Dal is 34. Then Lamed Gimel, that's ours. And you see, if you go on a little, it says Walled Lake, West Bloomfield, Michigan. So we're now part of this campaign, and I hope we'll keep working, and Temple Israel will become a place where we really move the ball forward in terms of spiritual dynamics. So let's, yes, Susie? Well, if you look at page 580. Oh yeah, it's hard to find. So there's the first just blank page. Then here, this is the title page, Likutei Amorim, Tanya, that's the official name of the Tanya. And down here, it says, this is the Laibl Wolf, West Bloomfield. And then just turn the page right over, the opposite side. Oh, I see. Then there's like a table of contents. Then there's another title page. And then behind that, this English page here, it says, Likutei Amorim Tanya. It's the English translation. And there, over the year, it says, what's that, Hotzea edition? Mazeh. Hotzea, printing, published, and then it's 7,533. Like Kuf Lamed Gimel is 533. So in Hebrew letters, that's the number that we are, the edition. Make sense? So now we're going to go to, oh, did I lose the page where we're at? Chapter 43, Mem Gimel, here we are. So now we want to go to page 122, or 123 rather, in your Tanya. And also open up your English too, you'll want that. So if you can find page 122, the numbers at the top right. There's a lot of chapters and numbers in here. And if we can find the spot, if you're watching at home, it's on the left side of the page. We want to go from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines up, last word, which is asher. So 12 lines up, last word. Anybody need help finding that? 123. Yeah, so it's the left side of 122, but they don't have the 123 printed. So the line is asher. So hold that spot. Now we're in chapter 43. We're going to learn from our Tanyas. Chapter 43, we learned about, going inside, 2 levels of lower fear. Yeah, 2 levels of lower fear. So in our conversation, we're now learning how to use meditation to create spiritual emotions of our divine soul. And we want to have fear and we want to have love as well, or awe and love. And now we're dissecting all the different qualities of awe and the qualities of love and the meditations that we'll do to achieve them. First division is, in fear, in awe, there's a lower awe and there's a higher awe. Right? Lower awe is just nullifying myself before God because God is so great from seeing God in the world. Higher awe is being in awe of God's essence, not of anything God has done. So nothing to do with the world is great or the spiritual worlds are great and so God is great. That really is off God's resume. Now I'm dealing with God's essence and I'm just so in awe of God's essence that I have this higher quality of fear. And we said the lower quality of fear, you need that before you can have love that really is full. So that's just a basic level of awe where it's like I'm inhibited as if someone is watching me. And that someone, of course, is God. And so I do the right thing, I don't do the wrong thing. And that's a lower level of fear. Within there, we said there's 2 levels as well. There's constricted consciousness fear and expanded consciousness fear. Constricted consciousness fear, that is where I'm meditating on aspects of the physical world, and that causes me to be in awe of God. So, my family is so amazing, they're so beautiful. Who created my family? God. I'm in awe of whoever created my family. Israel is such a beautiful country. I'm in awe of everything that's happening in Israel. Well, God's creating that, so I'm in awe of God. The Grand Canyon is so majestic. The stars are so beautiful. I'm in awe, and I take that and meditate that God is creating that, and that creates awe for God. Make sense? Just doing it. It's sitting and doing it creates an emotion that now lives in your life. The expanded consciousness, still lower awe, that is where I don't meditate on the physical world, I meditate on the spiritual worlds. And the Alter Rebbe gave us the ratios, so to speak, of 500 years walk from one level to the next and the feet of the angels and so on. But the point is, it's like looking at the earth as a speck in the whole galaxy and realizing as grand as the earth is, the galaxy dwarfs it so it doesn't exist. Well, that's the physical world. Now the spiritual worlds dwarf even the entire physical cosmos. So if you can wrap your head around that, and then you meditate on the spiritual world and the levels of the angels and the feet and etc. Now, you can still have a lower level of awe, but it's an expanded consciousness version. You're in awe outside the limits of the physical world. But then there's higher level awe, where you don't look at that God created the physical world or God's creating the spiritual and the physical worlds. Nothing to do with what God's doing, just God's essence. As we said, let's not go there. So if I'm in awe of God's essence, now I can have access to a very lofty level, yira ilah. And then finally, we learned about 2 levels of love. So we got fear categorized, 2 levels of love. The first one, the higher level we talked about, was ava rabba, and that is a great love where, again, you're connected to God, you're feeling close to God, you have a pleasure, and it's defined by it's still quiet closeness to God, so you're not yearning, there's no fire, you're not trying to leave the world to find God, you're there. B, it doesn't come from our own work. It has to be something that's granted as a gift. And C, it requires that you have complete yira to begin with, complete yira. So if I'm in a state where, sometimes I do the right things, but sometimes I let myself go, and I pick and choose when I'm trying to be a good person and when I'm relaxing, and I don't live my life all the time aware that at least someone's watching me and I should try my hardest. Now, it's like, as we said later, the Alter Rebbe said, if you're inviting a king to your house and your house is messy and filthy, it's just not going to happen. You got to first clean your house up and scrub and polish everything, then you invite the king in. And the same thing with my life. If I'm not taking this opportunity with the full devotion that it really is, I'm just lower level awe, right? If I'm not there all the time, then this higher level of love, it's going to pass me by. It's not going to come. So those 3 qualities of ava rabbah: 1, it is defined by closeness to God and stillness, so to speak. 2, it is a gift from above. It doesn't come from our own work. You can't develop yourself until you know you'll get to it. It may not come. And 3, it only comes to someone who has at least a complete practice of lower level awe. And finally, the second level of love, which is ahavat olam, and we're just reviewing quickly here, that is a lower level of love that we can work on, and that is not characterized by closeness and pleasure. It's characterized by distance and yearning. So ahavat olam feels like I'm stuck in this world, I'm stuck in my narishkeit, I want to reach God, but how can I do that? And I'm on fire to do that. And I'm searching and I'm finding it's the typical seeker energy that many of us have. And that you simply get by meditating on God's greatness, and there's a distance, right? God's not accessible or here consciously to me, and so I feel a yearning. 2, so 1 is that it's characterized by yearning, like fire instead of water. 2, it is actually a result of our work. If I do avoida and I do work and I meditate and I work on myself, now I will increase my level of ahavat olam. And 3, you don't have to have a complete yira to establish ahavat olam. This is something we can work on at any time. You can even, as you'll see, start with it, even though that's not the typical way. So here we go, inside. So we are, if you're following in the Tanya, the translation, it's page 633, Asher al Yedei. And if you're in our own Tanyas, which we're going to learn from here, we're on page 122, last word, Asher, just below the middle of the page. Asher al yedei hitbonenut zo mimela titpashet midat hava shebenefesh milvusheha. And Sue Ellen, you have the English as a result? Oh, so people online, let's use that microphone. Thank you. Got it? Are you, oh, thanks. Just a little technical moment here.
As a result of such contemplation, the attribute of love, which is in the soul, will, as a matter of course, divest itself from its garments, which it has previously worn.
So we talked about meditating, and you can use our long, short path to do it, which we do at the end of most classes. And you can do it for a sustained amount of time daily, ideally. When we meditate on that God is filling the worlds, God is surrounding the worlds, an even more distant level, on a lofty level, and even that all the worlds are like nothing, they're nullified before God, right away, my soul is going to come to the conclusion that if the world doesn't exist, why should I invest my emotion in it? I've been trained since youth to want lollipops and slides and even friends and emotional and spiritual pleasures, right? Some of which are wonderful. But if none of that exists, maybe the only thing I should invest my emotion in is the Ein Sof, is God. Because my friends, that's the Ein Sof. My family, that's the Ein Sof. So it's not that you don't cherish and treasure them. You cherish and treasure them more, but you're not fragmenting your emotions and placing some on this friendship, some in this family, some in this career, some on money, some on food, some on other pleasures, whatever it might be. And you're going through life with this fragmented set of desire that's split up in all different directions. And by the way, if I lose that thing, then what happens? My life turns upside down and I suffer, right? So I'm not detaching from that because I know that's real, but I'm just taking all that and I'm consolidating that desire on the Ein Sof, because that's the reality, right? A lower way of looking at the world is that there's multiple phenomena and I can love each one or hate some things and it's all divided up. A higher aspect, by meditating on God's greatness, that the world doesn't even exist. Okay, so I love God. And in my life, it looks like I love my kids, I love learning, I love taking care of my body, so I'm in good shape, whatever it could be. But all that becomes avad olam, love for God. And I'm not fragmenting it anymore. I'm focusing it on the Ein Sof. And now, every desire or love that I could have physically can flare up even more towards the Ein Sof and cause me to be really, really dynamic spiritually in my Jewish practice. Okay, Maya, go ahead.
דהיינו שלא תתלבש בשום דבר הנאה ותענוג גשמי או רוחני, לאהבה אותו ולא לחפוץ כלל שום דבר בעולם, בלתי השם מלבדו, מקור החיים של כל התענוגים.
Isn't that nice? It's a pleasure to hear Hebrew read. Yeah. Such a beautiful native accent, right? From our own Tanya. Go ahead, Doreen.
That is, it will not clothe itself in anything of pleasure or enjoyment, whether physical or spiritual, to love it and will not desire anything whatsoever in the world other than God alone, the source of the vitality of all enjoyments.
Right, so our soul can have garments, and it can engarb itself in all kinds of things. If I sit down and play, my son plays magic with some of his friends, and he's at the age where now he's 13, he doesn't necessarily want to hang out with me, it's a stage, I get it, And so my wife said, you know what, if you want to stay close to your son, learn how to play magic. That's what he's crazy about, these cards. And I'd never considered playing magic. It seemed, silly, boring, cards, who cares, right? So instead I said, Cedar, can you make me a magic deck? He sat down, he explained to me how it works, he taught me the game, he set me up, and we started playing. And it was just wonderful to spend time with him. But interestingly now, I got hooked on the game too, and I want to play magic, right? So I want to be careful, because I'm not really there to play magic. When I'm on my deathbed, I look back and I say, you know what, I never got that card, I didn't refine my deck to the point, and whatever. I'm not going to care. That's not what life is about. But spending time with my son, that's a true moment of taking twos and making them into one. That I care about. So I'm trying to make sure that I stay connected to my son, because that's a holy purpose. But I'm trying to divest myself of my pleasure that I have in the game of magic, because I could take it or leave it. It doesn't matter. And you can do that with everything. We can enclothe our soul in any garments, and the desire of our soul, which is the highest aspect of our soul, will flow towards those garments. And then that will fill my mind, and it'll create emotions, and it'll cause my thought, speech, and action to flow towards that thing. So A, you want to be careful what you invest the desire of your soul in. And B, this practice is taking that all back. Right? all the hooks that I've created in my life of what I desire and all the fragmentation that makes, I'm taking it, I'm unifying it, I'm saying this is all Ein Sof, none of the garments exist, and I'm going to divest my soul of those garments and get myself, hopefully, to a place where now nothing is distracting, nothing's pulling the primary trigger of my soul, which is Tanug, which is desire. That's part of Keter for the Kabbalists, right? I'm not allowing that to be siphoned off to any worldly thing, even a worldly thing that is of value. I mean, let alone a worldly thing that's toxic, right? I mean, go to drugs and go to other things. But even something like exercise, right? It's a mitzvah to take care of your body. It's good. But I can allow that to become my pleasure, and now I'm working out 3 times a day, and I'm in front of the mirror, and that becomes my identity. Now, I've taken the pleasure of my soul and invested it in exercising for my own sake. I'm supposed to exercise, but I want to take that pleasure and focus it on the Ein Sof. It's a commandment. God created this body. I reflect God better when I'm in good shape. I can do good things for the world. I can play my part in this whole puzzle. But I don't want to focus and engarb the pleasure of my soul in the exercise itself, only in how it is being created by the infinite and how it fits into my purpose in life. That makes sense? This is like a huge. Oh, good. I got an eyebrow. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Hold on. Maya has to just do one more, and then we'll discuss.
Okay. I need to?
One more?
I don't-
Sheni Shilcha, Ken.
I have another one?
Yeah. Hold on.
Okay.
Maya has to go, so I want to read one more, and then you'll have to listen to me. Ken, שכולם
שכולם בטלים במציאות וכלו ממש כמאה, חשבי ואין ארוך ודמיון כלל ביניהן,
חס ושלום,
חס ושלום כמו שאין ארוך לעין ואפס המוחלט לגבי חיים נצחיים.
תודה. For the all, let's do the English. Rick, for the all.
For they all are nullified in reality and are counted as nothing at all, compared with him, there being no manner of comparison or similitude between them, God forbid, between all worlds, all worldly pleasures and God, the source of vitality, of all pleasures, just as there is no comparison between that which is absolutely naught and nothing and everlasting life.
So what was your point? First Rick, then Sue Ellen. On the mic, so they can hear.
That you were talking about. Could you just give us another example?
Oh, it just wasn't clear. Yeah, so I can live life, and I can be passionate about money. I can be passionate about exercise. I can be passionate about video games. And if you look at my life, most of the day, I'm doing something to either earn more money, what were the 3? Play video games or exercise. Good, fine, this is a good person. Look, I'm providing for a family, I'm in good shape, I have a hobby that's not destructive. What's wrong with that? The issue is, now when I try to meditate on God, my mind is so occupied with the things I've invested my pleasure in, right, which is money, exercise, video games, or you name it, doesn't matter, that how am I gonna pay attention to something so abstract, right? It's like I'm like a kid, and you put the birthday cake in front of the kid, and they said, hold on, first have some spinach salad. It's like, I don't want that. Now I see the cake, right? And it's all about the cake, and their mind is, the blood's rushed to their pleasure centers of their brain. And you can't, how is a kid going to pay attention to a cake? That's me if my pleasure is invested in anything in the world. And I'm trying to meditate on the abstract essence of the Ein Sof. Forget it. Because what's my brain thinking? When do I get to exercise? How much money did I earn? Oh, the video games are waiting for me. If I quiet my mind down, I unhook the pleasure from those things that are part of the world, and then I rehook them all to this one thing, the Ein Sof, by saying, the world doesn't exist. The world does not exist in front of the Ein Sof. It's not real. It has no reality of its own. It's just God's reality. Now, the pleasure I put into earning money, that's really a pleasure I have towards God, because God is creating that wealth for me to do something with, hopefully productive. The pleasure I have in working out, that's really a pleasure I'm taking in the Ein Sof, because who's creating my body? Who's letting me live for the next 10 seconds with this miracle that's happening? Who commanded me to exercise and take care of this body? And so on. So I'm just unhooking the pleasure from anything that I can identify as part of the world, which is the natural way that I invest pleasure, and I'm rehooking it, or I'm clothing it, in the Ein Sof, which is the real reality of what I'm taking pleasure in. This is something where you can't do both. You can't do both, because if I'm taking pleasure in the world, yeah, we do. It's natural. Yeah. That was so quit. Just cracking our whip. Yeah.
We all take pleasure. I take pleasure looking at a tree.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's saying, you all rather say, you can't take pleasure in that at all, or?
The Alter was saying, if you want to experience Ahavat Olam, which is the love of your divine soul for the abstract, infinite reality of the Ein Sof, then yes, if I'm a bird watcher and I love going out and taking pictures of birds or trees or anything, and that's what I'm passionate about, that's actually going to get in the way of me having love for something abstract and infinite, which is creating those trees and birds.
This is getting back to only a Benini or a tzaddik, but a Russia can't.
No, Russia can do that, because for Ahavat Olam, for the lower level love, you don't need a complete yira. So complete yira, you're probably already a Benini if you're really walking around constantly aware that I should always do the right thing. That's difficult, and that's probably a Benini level. But that's the higher level of love requires that. The lower level only requires, and I don't have to not look at trees and enjoy it. I can still come and look at a tree, as long as in my mind I'm aware this tree has no reality, it has no beauty of its own. The beauty I'm looking at is the beauty of the Ein Sof and the reality of the Ein Sof. And I'm still a person looking at a tree enjoying it. It sounds like it's splitting hairs, but it's not, because now I'm focusing my spiritual emotions on the Ein Sof, and I'm not splitting myself up and attaching myself to something in the physical world. Doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to enjoy trees. I'm not allowed to eat birthday cake, right? You are. I'm not allowed to enjoy how beautiful my wife is. You are, right? But I'm aware that all that is really the Ein Sof. You get it? Okay. I think now we should pause for l'chaim, because this is a big day, and it should be a little bit. No one's eating, so feel free to open up something in front of you. And I should have done it earlier, because we'll have to take a tiny l'chaim, because it's the middle of the day. But it is a bit of a celebration, so hope you'll join us at home if you've got. Have people know what this tastes like? The Macallan? Anybody? Give us a what is it? Is it peaty? It's Scotch. It's Scotch. Okay, good. It's a good smooth Scotch. So this is a nice celebration that we've learned from our. Oh, there it is. So anybody who wants, I'm going to pour very, very homeopathic shots here. Like that much. Grab one if you want. Yeah. Well, maybe people come take themselves. I don't know how people feel about it. Oh, these cups are tricky. Here, let's use these cups. These cups are going to be easier. It's just, you don't have to. There you go. Here, you want to grab a little cup. I don't want to handle everything. You take one.
Thank you.
You know what I mean?
Can't get them up.
Take two.
Perfect.
L'chaim, we'll do a blessing.
Thank you. Well,
Grab a cup out of there. Yeah, no, well, see? You want more? Oh. I was like, it's not enough.
You're so good.
I'm looking at
You're
it.
so bad. Oh, Noreen. Here, Noreen. We need a couple more here.
Yeah.
These all aren't for me now. Come on. Okay, I need one more.
There you go. If we're the evening, we'd have a little more substantial, but there you go. This is Macallan. More? Anybody? Everybody? Danelle? Yes. It's on me. It's not there. They'll fire me instead, okay? We're all in this together. for all your help. So this is l'chaim. It's a big tradition to have a l'chaim at an important moment. No one would have believed that this was possible. When we started teaching the Tanya here, anyone I spoke to in this community was like, "You're teaching Tanya at Temple Israel? Did they let you?" Like, you know, it's going to explode and the whole place will turn into like divine energy, which maybe it will, I don't know. But here we are, we're learning, we're sharing with people, and not only that, we're learning from our own Tanya, which is printed, you know, in the Chabad publishing system, like right in the heart of this whole system. So it's a gewaldige moment. This has probably never happened in the world, and we're all part of this. So I hope everyone here takes this knowledge and brings it into your life in a real way, in a visible way, that people around you will look and say, "Oh, you're a new, changed person. What are you doing that you're enjoying life so much?" And it should spread, and we should really take this to heart and learn it. So mazel tov to everyone. Many blessings on anyone who helped out with this project, here or elsewhere. And l'chaim, the blessing is Baruch, Ata, Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech haolam, shehakol, niyah, bidvaro. Nice. L'chaim. And help yourself to some peanuts. It's funny, is it? Yeah, what is it? Marcus, you know it? Isn't that amazing? And not came. That's my mind, right? Coming is coming. It's continual. So we're talking about how the world has no reality of its own. That's right in the blessing you say for this food. Shekol niyah bivaro, by whose word everything is coming into being at all times, right? So I love the taste of this scotch, but guess what? It has no reality of its own. Yes. So God's word, all this kabbalistic stuff we learned about, you know, Shechina and Malchus and the letters, it's creating this, and the fact that I love the taste, it means I love God's imagination, because God's saying, I'm going to make a scotch that's going to taste just like this. Yeah? Here, go on the mic so we can... Thanks. Now it feels like a Farbrengen. Peanuts. Baruch.
Baruch. The Kabbalists used to, Rabbi Nachman in the Baal Shem Tov, which I did find out, Rabbi Nachman is the great-great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov.
Great-great-grandson.
Yes.
Good,
and actually grew up in the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov's childhood home.
And same generation? He'd be younger than the Maggid then, or maybe, yeah, thank you, good.
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
I'm like just now getting into reading about him, but it's amazing. But the ancient Kabbalists used to say, for eating to be such a mindful experience, talking while eating sort of interrupts the process. It makes you admire the food more physically than spiritually.
Yeah.
And they also recommend sitting while eating because it's almost like a form of prayer. They look at it as almost a form of prayer. I don't know. It's something that I found very interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. You can create a spiritual pathway out of so many things. That's a different school it's in Hasidus. It's a different school of thought, I think, than we're talking about. But I know there's Hasidic groups where part of the practice is actually the Rebbe sits down to eat something, and then they pass the plate around. You eat the Rebbe's food. And it sounds like, I don't know, I have to read, it sounds like this is of that mindset that I don't want to eat while I'm talking just, mindlessly. I want to focus on the godliness of the food and the blessing. And for that, I need to sit and focus. It's beautiful. And you can elevate the world that way, right?
Right.
Reb Nachman is a different school of Hasidus than the Alter Rebbe. So that's why you see these variations, but they're both pathways of serving God.
It's just, I'm learning the different aspects of like, I don't know, it's neat learning the differences of all of them.
You look excited.
Yeah, I really am. I think this is learning stuff.
Yes.
When I'm out walking, usually with my dog, I'm always aware of how wonderful the sceneries, the trees and the plants and maybe a lake or a building. And I do connect that with God when I'm walking. And I guess the suggestion that you're saying is that I should bring more of that into my life, not just when I'm walking.
Well, that is very much the practice. It's the same thing the Alter Rebbe is saying. So if the walking is a time of meditation, and you're seeing beauty in the world, and you're connecting that to the Ein Sof, that sounds like Hitbonenut, meditation on connecting God's greatness with the grandeur of the world to create a love and a connection. That's
Right,
it.
but bring it into other things within my life, not just the walking.
Right, so more is better.
Right.
More is better,
Yeah.
for sure. All right, I'm going to lose track of time. I could go for a few hours today. 15, okay, let's do a little more inside. Then I'll finish with a story, and then we'll do a little meditation. Then you can stay and celebrate. If you're not driving, that's still there. If people could walk home, right? I'm going to do one more line in here. Shekulam b'telim, is that where we are? Uchmosh katuv. Uchmosh katuv, mili b'shamayim, v'imach lo chafatzti ba'aretz kla. Okay. And go ahead, as is written.
As it is written, whom have I in heaven to love other than God? The verse goes on to say, and there is nothing upon earth that I desire with you.
So this harkens back to something the Alter Rebbe himself would say. He was such a spiritual giant, it was almost out of control. Sometimes when he was giving a maimar, which is a spiritual talk where he's connected with dvekus to the Ein Sof, and he's speaking really inspired words, he'd lose physical control of his body, and he'd be rolling around. They had like special kind of soft walls, because he'd be rolling around almost out of control, and his students would be following around what he's saying, but he was not even like in conscious control of his body. That's how connected he was. He couldn't write the word Atzilus. Atzilus is the highest spiritual world. He wrote an Aleph, and they'd find him 3 hours later just in complete dvekus, in a what do you call it? Elevated spiritual state, having no sense of physical consciousness. And it's like Alter Rebbe, so he could barely write the word Atzilus. He was just so connected. And he would say, in these times, he'd say, even though he was well aware and connected to the spiritual levels and the different worlds and the different levels of heavenly beings, and he could travel up and down and connect to them, and that's such a pleasure for spiritual seekers, he would ignore all that. He'd say, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your heaven, I don't want your Olam Haba, I don't want any of it, I just want you alone. Ich will nicht dein Gan Eden, ich will nicht dein Olam Haba, right? I just want you, God's essence. And he would push away all of that spiritual insight and all that connection, because he knew these are just spiritual worlds. And in the end, whether it's attachment to pleasures in the physical world or attachment to pleasures in the spiritual worlds for a spiritual giant like him, that's actually a distraction. He just wants to connect to God's essence. He doesn't want any love or any awe for anything in any world, no matter how spiritual. Just you alone. So that's that level. If we live like that, even a simple physical sense, but I'm just aware, God's creating that peanut. Oh, I love God, right? That's all it takes. Repeating that and meditating on that can create a great sense of ahavat olam, of lower level love. Kla she'eri levavi, tzur levavi, v'gamer uchmoshit ba'er lekaman. My flesh? Oh, okay. Oh.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Paula.
What am I reading? Okay. The next verse continues, my flesh and my heart yearn for you, rock of my heart. As the various levels of love a Jew may attain by contemplating God's greatness will be explained later.
Right, so later in chapter 44, we're going to go zoom in and get details of the Hitbonenut, or the meditation. But we actually can get to a point where I don't just have an abstract appreciation, but the same way my flesh wants a brownie and my heart wants to watch the next blockbuster movie, I can have those physical feelings of desire for something as abstract as the Ein Sof. If I craft my consciousness, if I repeat this practice with meditation, what I focus on intellectually will create emotions, and then I will be a spiritual person, and my divine soul will have this love for God that, as we said, it's going to elevate all my mitzvahs. Last paragraph for today, v'gam mi she'en midat ahava shebenafsho milubeshet klal b'shum tanu gashmi or ruchani yachol halhiv. That's a new Hebrew word. Halhiv, to kindle. Nafsho k'rish be'esh shalhevet aza v'lahav ha'oleh hashamayma al yedei hitbonenut haniskeret le'el k'mo she'itba'er lekaman. Go ahead.
Also he, whose soul's attribute of love is not vested at all in any physical or spiritual enjoyment, is able to kindle his soul, as with burning coals and an intense fire, and a flame that soars heavenward, by contemplating the above-mentioned matters, as shall be explained later on.
So I don't know anyone like this, but apparently there's people who are just, they're really stoic, they're cold, so to speak, and they're not passionate about physical stuff or spiritual stuff or intellectual stuff, or they're just going through life, they're calm, they're cold, and that's sometimes the trickiest thing, is someone that has a passion, a thief who's passionate about stealing, in a week can suddenly turn to be passionate about become a police officer and be passionate about protecting the city from stealing, right? Because they got fire, they got passion. They just have to flip the switch and have a change of mind. But someone who doesn't have a fire burning, now it's hard sometimes to get them to create emotions, because it's just, there's no energy to redirect. You have to create the energy. So even that type of person, which is such a difficult challenge, in chapter 46, he's going to give a meditation for how that kind of person can also create this avad olam, right? So that's what this whole section is about, until chapter 51, different aspects of spiritual emotions and specific meditations to focus in and use our practice to inspire them. So let me finish before we meditate with a story. I told this once before in this class. I don't remember if it came online. It's got to do with the Tanya. And it's a beautiful story because so many of these stories, there's a well-known saying that if you believe everything you hear in a Hasidic story, you're a fool. But if you don't believe what you hear in a Hasidic story, you're a bigger fool. So yeah, it's true that stories that are told over centuries, you get different versions of them, and so which one's true, and maybe you feel like it's just kind of a fanciful thing. So there's some stories that are really a mashal, there was a king, and he went out to the field, and he met this, where the Baal Shem Tov made up a situation to teach something. Those never happened. But many, many of the Hasidic stories that come down, keep in mind, they're told by people for whom this is like Torah. So they're not just going to make something up to try and elevate or to try and impress somebody. Right? For them, when you hear a story, they say, no, I heard this from so-and-so, heard it from so-and-so, it's this close to the source, and this is the detail I heard, and they really care. And these are people for whom lying would be like giving up their whole identity. Like, they're not liars. That's like the worst thing they'd ever do. So it came down in a chain of transmission, which is really quite secure. Although that being said, every Chassid is very proud of the Rebbe, and they'll add, they'll expand, and they'll kind of like make it sound. So in that process of really like talking about the Rebbe, you get a little embellishments. I get it. This story, however, is not unique, but it's special, I think, because it involves several people who we know existed, and several people in different cities, and people who were leaders in their communities. So this is not, there was a fellow whose name was Yitzchak, or maybe it was Shmuel, and he lived in a town somewhere in Russia. This is really, as you'll see, it involved real people, business people, leaders of communities in different centers, and it connects to the Tanya and the publishing of the first Tanya. And as I said, the first Tanya, I have the title page. You can look it up online, or you can't put it online. The title page says, Tanya first printing in Slavita, or Slavita. Right, so it's connected to an actual printing of a Tanya by a printing house. So this story is as real as it gets, from real figures who have real descendants. So it starts. There was a Jew named Reb Moshe, who's the son of a well-known Chassid, also Reb Pinchas Koritzer, and he lived in Slavita, and he wanted to create a printing press. And this is around the time, the beginning of the Alter Rebbe starting to publish things, so 1790 something, right? But this was in Russia. He knew it was very difficult to get a license to print anything, let alone to print Jewish things, because the Minister of Education, who was in charge of publishing and gave out the licenses, was known to be a real not fan of the Jews, let's call it. In Russia, hating Jews was fine, and if you wanted to, you could go all out, and nobody would nobody would you, right? It was, if you hated Jews, you hated Jews. It's like I might hate a food, and nobody cared in Russia. So they knew this was going to be difficult. It was going to cost a lot of money, officially and unofficially. It was very difficult to do, and the Minister of Education was not a friend who was going to help us publish things. But because he was involved in printing the Alter Rebbe's works and trying to print the first edition of the Tanya, he went to the Alter Rebbe in Liozna to try and get a blessing, and also to check, is this something that's going to work? Because the Alter Rebbe, his vision was very far, as we said. So he went to Liozna, and he asked the Alter Rebbe, this is what I want to do. Should I do it? What should I do? Can I get your blessing? The Alter Rebbe said, yes, it's going to work. And this is what you have to do. And here, it's crazy. Imagine you go to someone with a real issue, tricky, political, financial, business, everything. He said, I want you to go to the city Mohilev, just out in the middle of nowhere, right? Where there's this Melamed, there's this kids teacher, Rebbe Yisroel. Take him and go to Vilna, and there with God's help you'll succeed. So this Moshe, who's a businessman, is scratching his head. He says, I know this is a holy man who works miracles and who sees far, but I imagine I'm trying to get like a license for something, and someone says, go to what's like a Michigan city that's like just not connected to any. Which one? Okemos. We love Okemos. Go to Okemos. There you go. You're on the same wavelength. There's this guy Stephen, who's teaching at a kindergarten. I want you to take him and then go to, Kamloops. Oh, that's BC. Somewhere else. And there, with God's help, you're going to figure this thing out. I have to go to Lansing. The person who's going to help me is in Lansing. And what does a kindergarten teacher in this other city have to do with, that makes no sense at all. But if you're a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, you take this seriously. What he said, and you'd have to do exactly if you want it to work. So he says, okay, I'm going. He goes to Mohilev. He finds this Rebbe Yisroel. He says, how do you do? I'm Moshe. I'm trying to create a printing press. And the Alter Rebbe, our Rebbe, said, I should come find you and go to Vilna where we'll succeed. So now Rebbe Yisroel says, did you make a mistake? I don't know anything about publishing. Vilna has nothing to do with publishing. I have nothing to do with the Minister of Education. How do I have anything to do with this? How's it going to work? But he talked to him. He said, you know what? When the Rebbe says you have to do it. And so he found a substitute to take care of his students, and then they went to Vilna. And they wander into the town. So where do they go? They go to the head of the Jewish community in Vilna, Reb Rafoils. So this is three people, right? There's Moshe, who's the head of this printing press. There's this Reb Yisroel, and then there's Reb Rafoils, who's the head of the Jewish community in Vilna. They knock on his door, and here's these two Jews coming to try and get a printing permit to somewhere that has nothing to do with printing, that's not anywhere near Petersburg, where the whole thing's supposed to happen. So Rafoils is also scratching his head. I have no idea how to help you guys, but come on in, stay with me, and we'll see what happens. So they're sitting, they're kind of waiting for a few days, they're just doing what they do. And finally, Reb Rafoil says, you know what? What's the point sitting here in my home? Let's go out, we'll walk around the city. Who knows? Maybe some miracle will happen, right? So they're walking, and they're sitting in a park, and they're in a discussion about some Jewish topic. And suddenly, this very well-dressed man walks by them and stops, and then doubles back, and then sits on a bench near them, and is kind of like eyeballing them in a very strange way. So they just keep talking, and this well-dressed man is still sitting there. And finally, the three of them notice him, and they say, maybe we should check out who he is, if he wants something. And so Reb Rafoils, who's used to dealing with noble people, he speaks Russian, unlike the other two. He goes up, he says, excuse me, sir, in Russian, I notice you've noticed us in our conversation. Is there something I can help you with? He says, yes, I'd like to meet your friend who you're talking to. This is Rebbe Yisroel, the kindergarten teacher. But not here. Please ask him to come to my hotel room tomorrow afternoon, and here's my card. And then he gets up and leaves. And so they come back, and he says, here's his card. He wants to meet you, Rebbe Yisroel, tomorrow in his hotel room. Have you ever met the guy? And Yisroel says, no, how would I know such a noble non-Jew? I never had anything to do with him. But they look in his card, and they say, isn't that the name of the Minister of Education? And suddenly they get excited, and they're dancing, and something's going on here. They don't know what it is. So they get excited. They go home. The next day, Rebbe Yisroel goes to this hotel room. He's admitted into the place. And this is, in fact, the Minister of Education. He says, I was here on some private business, and I walked by, but looking at your face, you don't remember who I am, do I? And Rabbi Yisrael says, no, I have no recollection of you. He says, tell me, where are you from? And he says, well, I'm from Mohilev. That's, you know. And he says, no, aren't you from Shklov? And Yisrael was like, yeah, I was born in Shklov and I grew up there, but I've been in Mohilev for 20 years. How would you know that I'm from Shklov? The minister says, let me tell you a story. So there was a boy in Shklov, where you were from, who grew up as an orphan and started going down the wrong path and didn't care about the right things in life and started, doing the kind of nonsense that young boys do. And the community tried to correct him and tried to scold him or whatever they might do, but he was an orphan, and what did he know? Finally, the community did a practice they did, which they might have stopped by now, that when someone was really incorrigible, they put them in a pen, in a cage next to the synagogue, and locked him in to shame him, to try and change his behavior, and also as a warning to other young people that might go down the wrong path. And so this boy was sitting there crying in this cage, and people would make fun of him and even spit on him and the way people are. And it was just torture until one person saw him and had enough pity and enough sense that they quietly opened the cage and let him out. And then he left that town and had a deep hatred for Jews in his heart. And he came to Petersburg, where he was taken in by a priest and was raised and educated as a Christian, and grew more and more through the ranks until he became minister of education. He said, I never thought I'd see you again, but when I saw your face, I realized you were that person that freed me. And even though I had a hatred for Jews all my life, I always wanted to meet that friend that had freed me from that cage and somehow do something for him. And Rabbi Yisrael remembered. He said, I remember that issue with that poor orphan and how I freed him, but I wouldn't have recognized you now with who you are unless you told me. The minister said, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is, what can I do for you? I want anything I can do to repay you. Please let me know. Just fate has brought us together, so clearly I want to repay you. So Rabbi Yisrael said, well, what you call fate, I want you to understand, is something totally different. Hashgacha pratit, divine providence. And he went back and told him the whole story of the printing press of his friend, Reb Moshe. And he went to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe said, take Yisrael, go to this town, there it'll be worked out. We didn't know what was going on. And now here we are together. And the minister sat for a while in silence, very moved by this story. And he said, of course, I'll give the title for the printing. Your friend can do whatever he wants, print whatever books he wants. But the biggest miracle is that after hearing this story, I find I'm free of this hatred I had for the Jewish community that I've been holding for so long. It's amazing. But he said, but that's for your friend. What can I do for you? I want to repay you. Please let me do this. He takes out a check and he writes a check. The story that came to me is 2,000 rubles. So, this is like a poor teacher. And he said, no, I don't need anything. But he so sincerely wanted to help him that this Rebbe Yisrael took the check. He was now a wealthy man. And they embraced and they parted with tears and joy. And he came back and he told now Reb Moshe, you now are going to get your printing press license. And we have to go back to the Alter Rebbe and tell him what happened. And can you imagine the sight of someone like the Alter Rebbe that knew, whatever he could see, he knew, take this person, go to this city, and this will happen. And if you look at, you can find online, the title page of the first Tanya, it actually printed in Slavita, and that's the story of how it came to be. That's the kind of miracles that surround this book, so to speak. So I hope that you draw inspiration from that as I do. Let's take just a few minutes. I know I'm a little over time, and we'll do a little meditation to wrap our day up. And if you're with us in the past, just find yourself in a comfortable position. If you're new, just be seated or lying, however you like. To bring your mind to your sensory perception, I want to just scan all your senses once before we meditate as preparation. So take a moment, notice everything your ears are hearing, maybe background sounds that you've tuned out. Yeah, notice what your eyes are seeing behind closed eyelids. Let's scan through the sense of touch. So there's clothing touching my skin. There's the weight of my body on the chair and on the back of the chair, my feet on the ground, the air brushing against my hair and my skin. So all this sensory perception we may tune out, let's bring it to the forefront. As well, my sense of smell and taste, so there's lots of beautiful vegetation around here I can smell, and any lingering taste from the nice scotch we had. And with that all in my consciousness, let's even out my breathing. Breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Start with me, breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath in, 2, 3, 4. Release out, 2, 3, 4. Stay empty, 2. Starting again through your nose if you can, breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Keep the breath in. 2, 3, 4. Breathing out. 2, 3, 4. Remaining empty. 2. Keep that cycle going on your own. Breathing in again. Let's open up that wisdom gateway. If you'd like, you can pause if you're watching in the future and continue the cycle for a few rounds before you open that gateway. If you're with us, the space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath is our wisdom gateway. There's an empty space between the end of the in-breath and the beginning of the out-breath. Allow that to open very naturally, however it works for you, as you continue through the breathing cycle. Now much calmer than before, perhaps. The breath in balance. Now we're going to insert our divine concept into the wisdom gateway. This is where Hit Bonanut comes in, and we'll allow that to fill our mind. This whole world around us, all the senses that we scanned, everything we're aware of, it has no reality outside of the Ein Sof. Its only reality is the reality of the Ein Sof. The only pleasure I should have, perhaps, is pleasure in the Ein Sof. Let that point, that idea, expand in your wisdom gateway in your mind. Perhaps Bina comes quite naturally and starts to expand the details. Let that expand, whatever details occur in your mind, however you envision, however you hear, however you picture the abstract details, let that fill your mind. What appears to my senses as a world is really just Ein Sof. The world is godliness. There's not the world and then God. It's all godliness. It's the same thing. Any pleasure we take really is a pleasure in godliness and God's essence. See if that creates any new feeling, or even the potential for a new feeling, the sense that every experience I have can create a love for the Ein Sof, can strengthen my godly soul. Yes, and notice that sense of Ahavat Olam, that lower level of love, that's a primary tool for us in our meditation. Feel free to stay with that divine concept for any amount of time, but if you're with us, let's wiggle our fingers and toes. Yasher Koach, thanks if you're joining us online, thanks if you're here, and Mazel Tov. Today's a nice day, by the way. It's Isru Chag. It's the day after the Chag, so it's like you got the leftovers of the Chag, and beautiful that it's the day after Simchat Torah, and here we are finally getting our books of the Tanya right into our hands. So please take them, have them at home. We'll open them up and learn from them in the future, and wishing everybody a beautiful, beautiful day.